My name is David, and I'm a freelance photographer based in Seattle. I'm 29, and I make around $48,000 a year shooting weddings, portraits, and the occasional commercial work. It's not stable income, which means I'm always looking for ways to save money when I travel for jobs. In November 2022, I booked a gig shooting a destination wedding in Asheville, North Carolina. The couple was paying for my travel, but not accommodation. So I went on Airbnb looking for something cheap. I found a basement apartment listed for $45 a night, way below market rate for Asheville. The photos showed a small but clean space with a separate entrance, a kitchenette, and a bedroom with exposed brick walls. The reviews were mostly positive, 4 and 5 stars, comments like great value and quiet location. There was one 3-star review from August that caught my eye. Host was a bit odd. Heard footsteps above me all night, otherwise fine for the price. I figured footsteps were normal in a basement apartment. Someone lived upstairs. That's how these conversions work. I booked 3 nights. The address was in a residential neighborhood about 15 minutes from downtown Asheville. When I arrived on a Thursday evening around 7 p.m., the house looked normal enough. A 2-story Victorian painted dark green with white trim, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a separate staircase on the side leading down to the basement entrance. The host's name was Martin. He'd sent me detailed instructions. Park on the street, use the side entrance, door code is 4781, Wi-Fi password on the fridge, help yourself to coffee. He mentioned he worked nights and would be gone most of the time I was there, but to text if I needed anything. I grabbed my camera bag and suitcase and walked down the concrete stairs to the basement door. Punched in the code. The door opened into a small, dim space that smelled like damp concrete and fabric softener. The apartment was exactly as pictured. Small main room with a futon couch, a folding table, and a mini fridge. A doorway led to a tiny bedroom with a double bed and a closet. The bathroom was barely big enough to turn around in, toilet, sink, and a shower stall with a plastic curtain covered in mildew at the bottom. I unpacked my camera equipment, set my laptop on the table, and checked the Wi-Fi. Connection was decent. I ordered Thai food from DoorDash and settled in for the night. Around 10 p.m., I heard footsteps above me. Heavy, deliberate steps moving from one side of the ceiling to the other. Back and forth, back and forth. It went on for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I remembered the review. Heard footsteps above me all night. I tried to ignore it. Martin worked nights. Maybe he was getting ready to leave. I put in my earbuds and watched Netflix on my laptop. At 11:30 p.m., the footsteps started again. Same pattern, one side of the ceiling to the other, back and forth. But this time, they didn't stop. They continued for an hour, then 2 hours. I could track the path from what I assumed was the living room down a hallway into what must have been the kitchen and back. I texted Martin at 1:47 a.m. Hey, just checking, are you home? Hearing a lot of movement upstairs and want to make sure everything's okay. No response. The footsteps continued until almost 3 a.m. Then finally, silence. I fell asleep, exhausted. The next morning, I woke up around 9 a.m. to my phone buzzing. A text from Martin. Sorry for the late response. Was at work all night. Yes, I'm home now sleeping. The house is old and settles. Sometimes sounds carry weird. Let me know if you need anything. That didn't make sense. If he'd been at work all night and was only now home sleeping, who had been walking around upstairs for 4 hours? I wanted to ask, but I also didn't want to seem paranoid or difficult. I had 2 more nights booked and I needed to focus on the wedding shoot. I decided to let it go. That day I was out from 11 a.m. until almost 10 p.m. Venue tour, rehearsal dinner, photography, drinks with the wedding party. When I got back to the basement apartment, I was exhausted. I took a shower, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, and got into bed. The apartment was quiet. I could hear the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional car passing on the street above ground level. I started to drift off. At exactly midnight, the footsteps started again. Same pattern, same deliberate, heavy pacing. This time, I decided to record it. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and held it up toward the ceiling. The footsteps were clear, distinct, impossible to explain away as settling. After recording for 5 minutes, I stopped the app and played it back. The sound was even more unsettling hearing it compressed and played back, rhythmic, relentless, purposeful. I texted Martin again. "The footsteps are really loud tonight. Are you home?" This time he responded within a minute. "I'm at work. Won't be back until 6 a.m. You're hearing the house settle or maybe a neighbor. Old houses do this." I stared at the text. He was at work, so who was walking above me? The footsteps continued for 3 more hours. At one point, they stopped directly above my bedroom. I could hear them standing there, just standing, not moving, for a full minute. Then they resumed pacing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, Saturday, I was supposed to shoot the wedding. I looked like hell, dark circles under my eyes, pale skin, shaky hands from exhaustion and adrenaline. I drank 3 cups of coffee and forced myself to function. The wedding was beautiful. The couple was lovely. I did my job, got great shots, smiled through the whole thing. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the footsteps, about Martin's texts, about the fact that someone was in that house walking around while he claimed to be at work. I finished shooting around 9 p.m. I had one more night booked at the Airbnb, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back to that basement. I texted Martin, "Hey, I need to check out early. Family emergency. Thanks for hosting." He responded, "No problem. Hope everything's okay. Door locks automatically when you leave." I booked a room at a Holiday Inn Express near the airport for $110, money I didn't have, but I didn't care. I drove to the Victorian house one last time to grab my stuff. It was 10 p.m. when I pulled up. The house was dark except for one light in what looked like the living room window on the first floor. I walked down the side stairs to the basement entrance, punched in the code, and quickly started throwing my clothes into my suitcase. That's when I heard it. Footsteps directly above me, moving from the living room toward the kitchen. Heavy, deliberate, exactly like the nights before. But Martin had said he worked nights. He should be at work right now. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something new. The sound of the basement door at the top of the interior stairs creaking open. The door I'd noticed on my first day but never paid attention to because I used the external entrance. Someone was opening the door to the basement from inside the house. I heard footsteps on the interior stairs, slow, careful footsteps descending toward where I stood. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my camera bag, left my suitcase, and ran for the external door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. Finally, it opened and I burst out into the cold November air. I ran up the concrete stairs and didn't look back until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, picked them up, and finally got the door open. Started the engine and drove. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing at the top of the basement stairs, silhouetted against the light from the open door, just standing there, watching me leave. I drove straight to the Holiday Inn and didn't stop shaking until I was locked in my room on the 3rd floor with every light on. The next morning, I called Airbnb customer service and reported what happened. I told them about the footsteps, about Martin claiming to be at work while someone was clearly in the house, about the figure watching me leave. The customer service rep was polite but unhelpful. "Did you feel physically threatened?" she asked. "Someone was in the house walking around in the middle of the night while the host said he wasn't home," I said. "And then they came down to the basement while I was packing. Yes, I felt threatened." She said they'd look into it and issued me a partial refund for the unused night. A week later, I got a message from Airbnb saying they'd contacted the host, and he explained that he had a roommate who worked odd hours and sometimes walked around at night. The roommate had heard noise in the basement and went to check if I needed anything. Airbnb considered the matter resolved, but Martin had never mentioned a roommate. Not in his listing, not in his messages, not in his explanation about the footsteps being the house settling. He'd lied repeatedly about being alone. I left a 1-star review explaining everything. It stayed up for 3 days before being removed for violating community guidelines. My review apparently made unverifiable claims about the host's character. I checked the listing last month. It's still active. The basement apartment is still $45 a night. There are new 5-star reviews. Great value. Quiet place. Host was very accommodating. But if you scroll down far enough, you can still find that 3-star review from August. Host was a bit odd. Heard footsteps above me all night. I wonder how many other guests heard those footsteps. How many of them stayed all 3 nights and just dealt with it? How many of them made it to the door before whoever was upstairs made it down to the basement? I don't use Airbnb anymore. I stick to hotels, even the expensive ones. Because at least in a hotel, when you hear footsteps in the hallway, you know they're supposed to be there. I'm a software developer for a tech company in Austin, Texas. Name's Marcus, I'm 34, and I make about $92,000 a year writing code for enterprise applications. It's good money, but it also means I travel sometimes for conferences and client meetings. The company reimburses travel expenses, but there's always a cap on lodging, so I try to find reasonable accommodations. In March 2023, I had a conference in Portland, Oregon. The company would reimburse up to $150 per night for 5 nights, which sounds like a lot until you look at Portland hotel prices during conference season. Everything downtown was $200 plus. I found an Airbnb listing for a guest house in a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes from the convention center. $135 a night. Good reviews, entire place to myself. The photos showed a small standalone structure behind a main house. 1 bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchenette, and a small living area with a futon couch. The listing mentioned that the hosts, a couple named Brenda and Tom, lived in the main house and were very private, but would be available if needed. The reviews were solid, mostly 5 stars. A few mentioned that the hosts kept to themselves, which sounded perfect to me. I'd be working long days at the conference and just needed a place to crash. I arrived on a Sunday evening around 7 p.m. The address was in a neighborhood of older homes with big yards and tall trees. The main house was a craftsman-style bungalow with dark blue siding and white trim. The guest house was behind it, connected by a stone path through an overgrown garden. Brenda met me at my car. She was probably in her 60s, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Marcus," she said. "Welcome. Tom and I are so glad to have you." She walked me to the guest house, giving me a key on a key ring with a small brass tag that said, "Guest." The guest house was charming in a dated way. Floral curtains, doily-covered side tables, framed cross-stitch samplers on the walls. It smelled like lavender and old books. "Wi-Fi password is on the fridge," Brenda said, pointing to a small card held by a magnet. "Tom and I go to bed early, so please keep noise to a minimum after 10 p.m. We're light sleepers." She paused at the door. "Oh, and we ask that you keep the curtains closed at night. The neighbor has a security light that can be quite bright." It was an odd request, but I nodded. She smiled again, that same tight, not quite real smile, and left. I settled in, unpacked my conference materials, and ordered a pizza. Spent the evening reviewing my presentation for the next day. Around 10:30 p.m., remembering Brenda's request about keeping quiet, I turned off the TV and got ready for bed. As I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something. The bathroom window had a small gap in the curtain, where the 2 panels didn't quite meet. I could see across the dark yard to the main house. The lights were off except for one upstairs window that glowed with a soft yellow light. As I watched, a silhouette appeared in that window, someone standing very still, looking out. Looking, it seemed, directly at the guest house, at me. I stepped back from the bathroom window, my heart rate picking up slightly. After a moment, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. They were probably just looking out at their yard, at the night, at nothing in particular. I closed the gap in the curtain and went to bed. I slept poorly. The guest house made noises, creaking, settling sounds, and a few times I thought I heard footsteps on the stone path outside. But when I looked through the window, I saw nothing but darkness. The next morning, I was up early for the conference. As I was leaving around 7 a.m., I saw Tom for the first time. He was standing on the back porch of the main house, drinking coffee, watching me walk to my car. He was tall and thin, probably the same age as Brenda, with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes. He raised his coffee mug slightly in greeting. I waved back and got in my car. The conference was long and exhausting. Presentations, networking events, vendor booths. I didn't get back to the guest house until almost 11 p.m. The main house was dark and the yard was quiet. I let myself into the guest house, heated up some leftovers in the microwave, and collapsed onto the futon. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the doorknob turning. Not rattling, not jiggling, turning slowly, deliberately. Someone was trying to open the door. I sat up in the darkness, my heart pounding. The doorknob turned a bit more and then stopped. There was silence. Then I heard footsteps moving away from the door, crunching softly on the stone path. I got up and looked out the window. A figure was walking back toward the main house. Tall, thin. Tom. He climbed the porch steps and disappeared inside. I checked the door. It was locked. I'd locked it when I came in. The deadbolt was engaged. There was no way he could have opened it without a key. But he'd tried. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the futon with all the lights on, watching the door, listening for footsteps. In the morning, I was exhausted and anxious. I thought about saying something to Brenda or Tom, but what would I say? Why were you trying to open my door at 2 a.m.? They'd probably deny it or give some reasonable explanation. Maybe he was checking to make sure I'd locked it. Maybe he thought he heard something suspicious. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I went to the conference, forced myself to focus, and returned around 9 p.m. This time, I wedged a chair under the doorknob before going to bed. At 1:43 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stone path. Then the doorknob turned again, slowly, testing. The door pushed inward slightly but stopped when it hit the chair. There was a pause, then more footsteps walking away. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was trying to get into the guest house in the middle of the night. The next morning, Wednesday, I decided I had to say something. I walked over to the main house and knocked on the back door. Brenda answered, wearing a floral apron and holding a dish towel. "Good morning, Marcus," she said cheerfully. "Is everything all right with the guest house?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I said. "I just wanted to check. Has anyone been coming by the guest house at night? I've heard footsteps on the path a couple of times." Her expression didn't change. "Oh, that's probably Tom. He likes to walk around the property before bed, checks the gates, makes sure everything's locked. We've had problems with raccoons getting into the trash." "He tried the doorknob," I said, watching her face carefully. "Last night, around 2 a.m. Something flickered in her eyes. "Oh, he was probably just making sure you'd locked it. We're very safety conscious. There have been some break-ins in the neighborhood." She smiled that tight smile. "But I'll mention it to him. We certainly don't want you to feel uncomfortable." It felt like a dismissal. I thanked her and went back to the guest house. That day at the conference, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Tom trying the doorknob, about Brenda's explanation that didn't quite add up. If they were checking to make sure I'd locked the door, why not just try it once? Why multiple nights? Why at 2 a.m.? I considered checking out early, but I'd already paid through Friday, and Airbnb's cancellation policy meant I wouldn't get a refund. I decided I'd stick it out for 2 more nights and just be extra careful. Wednesday night, I wedged the chair under the doorknob again and moved the small dresser in front of the door for extra measure. I also set up my laptop on the table facing the door with the camera on, recording. At 2:03 a.m., the doorknob turned. I watched from the bed as it twisted slowly back and forth. The door pushed inward but stopped against the chair. There was a pause. Then I heard Tom's voice, muffled through the door. "Marcus, are you awake? I think I saw someone in the yard." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I barely breathed. "Marcus," he said again, "I just want to make sure you're safe." The doorknob rattled harder this time. The door pushed against the chair, harder and harder. The wood creaked. I could see the chair legs starting to slide across the floor. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispered to the dispatcher that someone was trying to break into where I was staying, gave her the address. The moment I said 911, the rattling stopped. Footsteps hurried away from the door. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me until officers arrived about 12 minutes later. 2 Portland police officers knocked on the guest house door. I let them in, showed them my laptop recording of the doorknob turning, explained about the previous nights. They went to talk to Tom and Brenda. I waited in the guest house shaking, my camera equipment and laptop already packed. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came back. "Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald say they heard a noise outside, and Mr. Fitzgerald was checking to make sure you were okay," the officer said, his tone neutral. "They seem very concerned about your well-being." "He tried to force the door open," I said. "You saw the recording." The recording shows someone turning the doorknob and pushing the door, the officer acknowledged. Mr. Fitzgerald says he was knocking and thought maybe you didn't hear him. He pushed the door to see if it was unlocked so he could check on you. It was the same bullshit explanation. At 2 a.m., the officer looked uncomfortable. Look, I understand you're concerned, but there's no evidence of a crime here. It's their property. They have a right to check on their guest house if they believe there's a safety issue. They're lying, I said. This is the third night this has happened. Have you considered checking into a hotel? The officer asked. If you don't feel safe here, you have other options. I did exactly that. Packed all my stuff, loaded my car, and drove to a Courtyard Marriott near the convention center. Paid $215 a night for the remaining 2 nights out of my own pocket. The company reimbursement wouldn't cover it, but I didn't care. I reported the incident to Airbnb. After a week of back and forth, they refunded me for 1 night, the night I left early, but not the other nights because I'd failed to communicate my concerns adequately with the hosts before involving law enforcement. I left a 2-star review explaining everything. It was taken down within days for making unverifiable safety claims. The listing is still active. I checked last month. There are dozens of new 5-star reviews. Charming guest house. Hosts were respectful of privacy. Would definitely stay again. But if you use the Wayback Machine to look at older cached versions of the review page, you can find other reviews that have been deleted. 3 of them mention hearing footsteps at night. 1 mentions the host checking the door at odd hours. Another says they felt watched during their stay. Whatever Tom and Brenda were doing, whether it was some weird privacy invasion, some attempt at intimidation, or something worse I don't want to think about, they'd done it before, and Airbnb kept taking down the warnings. I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs since then, but I never book a guest house behind someone's main residence anymore. And I always wedge a chair under the door before I go to sleep. Because now I know that locks don't mean anything when the person on the other side has a key. And sometimes the people you're supposed to trust with your safety are the ones you need protection from. I'm a graphic designer working remotely for a marketing agency based in Chicago. My name is Trevor, I'm 32 years old, and I make about $67,000 a year. The beauty of remote work is I can do it from anywhere with decent Wi-Fi, which is why I decided to take a month-long working retreat in the fall of 2023. I'd been living in my cramped studio apartment in Wicker Park for 3 years, and I needed space. I found a farmhouse on Airbnb in rural Iowa, about 40 minutes outside of Iowa City, for $850 a month. The listing showed a 2-story white farmhouse with black shutters, a wraparound porch, and acres of cornfields in every direction. The host's name was Vernon. His profile showed a man in his late 60s wearing overalls and a John Deere cap. His bio said he'd inherited the family farm and converted the main house into a rental after his wife passed away. He now lived in a smaller house on the same property, about a quarter mile down the gravel road. The farmhouse had 12 5-star reviews. Peaceful, exactly as described. Vernon was very helpful. I confirmed the Wi-Fi situation. I needed reliable internet for video calls and uploading large design files. Vernon responded, fiber optic installed last year. Gets 200 megabits per second down, 50 up. You'll have no problems. I booked October 1st through October 31st. I drove out on a Sunday afternoon. Once I got off I-80, the landscape changed dramatically, flat farmland stretching to the horizon. Small towns with grain elevators, roads that went perfectly straight for miles. Vernon's property was at the end of a gravel road. The farmhouse sat maybe 200 yards back, surrounded by harvested cornfields. Behind it, I could see a massive red barn and several smaller outbuildings. Vernon was waiting on the porch. He looked older than his profile photo, maybe mid-70s with deeply tanned skin and weathered hands. He showed me inside. The farmhouse was clean and spacious. 3 bedrooms upstairs, full kitchen, living room with a wood-burning stove. My place is just down that way, Vernon said, pointing toward a ranch house in the distance. If you need anything, just call. I come by every few days to check on the barn, but I'll stay out of your hair otherwise. He gave me a quick tour and warned me about one thing. Don't go in the barn. It's not structurally sound in places. and I've got equipment stored in there, insurance liability and all that. I nodded. No problem. The first week was exactly what I needed. I set up my workspace in the dining room and was productive in a way I hadn't been in years. Vernon stopped me twice, once to check on the barn, another time to drop off fresh eggs. Both times he was friendly but brief. On the 8th night, around 11 p.m., I heard a rhythmic metallic creaking. I looked out the kitchen window. One of the barn's large doors was swinging slowly open and closed with the wind. I texted Vernon, "Hey, one of the barn doors is open and swinging. Want me to close it?" He responded 5 minutes later, "I'll come by in the morning and secure it. Don't worry about it. Stay inside." The phrasing was odd. Stay inside. The door kept creaking all night until I put in earplugs around 2 a.m. The next morning, the barn door was closed. Vernon's truck was parked near it, and I could see him securing a chain and padlock across the doors. That night, the creaking had stopped, but I started noticing other things. Footprints in the dirt near the back porch that weren't mine, larger, made by work boots. A window upstairs left open about 2 inches, even though I was certain I'd closed all the windows. On Friday, 13 days into my stay, the internet suddenly cut out during a video call. I texted Vernon. His response came 20 minutes later. "Storm must have knocked something loose. I'll come by tomorrow to check it." But there hadn't been a storm. It had been a clear, calm day. I drove into Iowa City to finish my work, returning around 9 p.m. The internet was still down. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. The footsteps stopped at the front door. Then the doorknob turned, slowly, testing. "Vernon," I called out. "That you?" No response. The doorknob stopped turning. Footsteps moved across the porch and around the side of the house toward the barn. I texted Vernon. "Are you on the property?" Someone just tried my front door. No response for 30 minutes. I tried calling. It went to voicemail. I pushed the dining table against the front door and didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, Vernon's truck pulled in around 9 a.m. "Got your messages," he said. "Sorry, I was in town and had my phone off." "What's this about someone trying the door?" I explained everything. Vernon's expression didn't change. "Probably just me. I came by to check on the barn yesterday evening. Must have accidentally tried your door. My apologies." I called out. I said, "You didn't respond." "Hearing's not what it used to be," he said. "Sorry if I spooked you." He fixed the internet by resetting the router, then left. That night, I decided to investigate. I waited until midnight and walked to the barn with a flashlight. The main doors were chained and padlocked. I walked around the perimeter and found a smaller door on the backside, hidden by weeds. It wasn't locked. I pulled it open and stepped inside. My flashlight beam illuminated old farm equipment, a rusted tractor, hay bales, tools on the walls. And then I saw it in the back corner, a living space, a mattress with blankets, a camping stove, plastic bins full of clothes, a battery-powered lantern, empty food containers, granola bars, beef jerky, Mountain Dew bottles. Someone was living here. I backed toward the door. That's when I heard the sound of the main barn doors being unchained. Someone was coming in. I ran for the back door and sprinted toward the farmhouse. Behind me, I heard shouting. A man's voice, deep and angry. I got inside, locked the door, and pushed the kitchen table against it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "Someone's living in the barn on the property where I'm staying," I said. "They chased me. I need police here now." Through the window, I could see a figure walking toward the house. It was Vernon. He was carrying a shotgun. "He's coming toward the house," I told the dispatcher. "He has a gun. I'm sending units now. Stay on the line. Do not open the door." Vernon climbed the porch steps. "Trevor, open the door. We need to talk." "The police are on their way," I shouted. "You shouldn't have gone in the barn," he said. "That's my son, Daniel. He's been living out there for about 3 years now, since he got out of Anamosa, the state penitentiary. I didn't mention him in the listing because people get uncomfortable, but he's harmless, just needs a place to stay." I heard sirens. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled in, lights flashing. Vernon stepped off the porch, lowered the shotgun, and raised his hands. A deputy came to my door. "Sir, I'm Deputy Morrison. You can open the door." I opened it. Morrison was in his 40s, stocky, with a no-nonsense expression. Mr. Schultz says you broke into his barn and frightened his son. Is that accurate? There's someone living in that barn, I said. I'm renting this property through Airbnb, and Vernon never disclosed that. Morrison nodded slowly. Did you go into the barn? Yes, but Mr. Schultz asked you not to go in the barn, correct? Yes, but Morrison held up a hand. This is private property. Mr. Schultz has the right to have family members on his land. You entered a structure he specifically told you not to enter. No laws have been broken by them. What about tenant rights? That's a civil matter. You need to take that up with Airbnb. They left 30 minutes later. I packed my stuff and loaded the car. As I was leaving, Vernon walked over. I'm sorry it came to this, he said. Daniel really didn't mean any harm. You should have told me. And if I had, would you have booked? I drove to a Holiday Inn in Iowa City and contacted Airbnb that morning. They refunded me for the remaining 2 weeks, but said they couldn't take action against Vernon because having family members on the property isn't a violation of hosting standards. I left a 3-star review explaining everything. The review was removed within 48 hours for making claims about individuals not directly involved in the booking. I checked the listing last month. It's still active. Vernon's still renting the farmhouse for $850 a month. New 5-star reviews. So peaceful. Vernon was great. But if you look carefully at the photos in one of the wide shots showing the barn in the background, you can see smoke coming from a small metal pipe on the roof. Not from the house, from the barn. Because someone lives there, someone with a record and a reason to hide. And Vernon will never tell you about him until you hear the footsteps on your porch in the middle of the night.